Thanks for joining us on Shannons Club TV, the program for all motoring enthusiasts to revisit the histories of cars in Australia. Join us as we take a look at how our feature car performed both on the road and in competition, and also take a road trip with a proud owner.
We'll also get the latest market news from the Shannons auctions team. So let's get things rolling with the stylishly clever French sedan that was at the forefront of Europe's wholesale shift to front-wheel drive in the 1970s, the Renault 12.
When the Renault 12 went on sale in Australia, in time to take out the Wheels Car of the Year award for 1970, it set a new standard for that size of car. Like the Saab 900, the Renault 12 featured a rigid safety cell but weighed just 856 kilos. It was capable of 90 miles an hour given a tailwind or the slightest downhill gradient, and could also average 35 miles per gallon. Handling and steering were excellent. An amazing 45 years on, it is easy to think of this Reggie Renault as just another front-wheel drive European, but Renault was among the first to switch. And in its case, this was a huge change because through the 1950s and until the arrival of the charmingly quirky R4 wagon in 1961, Renaults not only had rear-wheel drive, but rear engines too. Fiat had just launched its 128, and deadly rival Peugeot's first front driver was the 1965 204, which was never sold in Australia. But the Volkswagen Golf was half a decade away, and even the Passat Audi Fox duet were nowhere in view. In summary, front-wheel drive would not be the true small and small-medium car orthodoxy until after 1980. Mark, the 12 was quite advanced, but it wouldn't have appealed to the Bathurst Brigade, would it?
No, not back in those days when the competing classes were based on a car's retail price. That would have put the little Renault 12 against the Datsun 1600 in Class B. And we know how the Datsun 1600 just dominated that class for years. And of course, when the race moved on from retail price-based classes to capacity, it would have been up against faster 1.6 litre cars. So it never really had a chance. However, Renault Australia did put together a little series, a one-make series for the Renault 12 in the mid-1970s, you might remember, called the New Star series, which provided plenty of, crash and bash, plenty of excitement. So the car did have some track action.
The 12 was sold here initially as the TL and later as the better equipped and brightly hued GL. I owned a dark blue GL and could hardly believe it was powered by a modest 1.2 litre engine developing just 60 horsepower because it cruised so effortlessly at 75 miles per hour, one short of the maximum of my 1960 Fiat 1100. There was real progress between 1960 and 1970. Like other Renaults, the 12 had magnificent front seats that folded flat, the boot was huge, but the biggest rival in my mind to the Renault 12 was the 16 TS, one example of which I had already owned by then. Every time I drove the smaller, less outlandish and much slower 12, I kept remembering the glorious TS. By comparison, the 12 was dull. Mark, the Renault 12 was not really a Bathurst contender, but it did follow its R8 predecessor into rallying and rallycross.
Yeah, it sure did. But unfortunately, it was unable to match its predecessor's success. Renault Australia's victory in the 1970 Australian Rally Championship, with its potent rear-engined, rear-wheel drive R8 Gordinis, had such a positive effect on brand image and sales that the company was keen to launch another assault on the ARC in 1972 with the latest front-engined, front-wheel drive Renault 12 Gordini. Like the R8 version, the new contender was designed by Amedeo Gordini, the brilliant Italian-born Parisian with a rare genius for extracting huge levels of performance from Renault's production-based cars and engines. He was to Renault what Carroll Shelby was to Ford. On paper, the new R12 Gordini with its factory-supplied rally kit appeared to have everything needed for another championship win. Powered by a hot 1.6 litre engine with twin Weber carburetors and 160 brake horsepower, a close ratio 5-speed gearbox, 4-wheel disc brakes and a minimum weight well under 1,000 kilograms. John, Renault claimed that its rallying successes at the time had a great effect on its brand image and sales. Did that influence your decision to buy Renaults at the time?
Only in the most indirect possible way, Mark. We had a Peugeot 404 in the family, and of course they'd done very well on the East African safari.
Yeah, sure did.
And I think there was just that kind of connection, the general sense of sport, but much more the sense of being a French car and therefore pretty good.
So do you think Renault was overstating the effect that its marketing was having based on its rallying success from perhaps a buyer who didn't come from a French car family?
Well, certainly from my point of view, I think. Well, I don't know. Well, it's hard to know. It's hard. You can't possibly measure a thing like that.
Yeah,
it's very hard to work it out. But I think they probably did overstate it.
Yeah, they were certainly into the sport in Australia, though.
It may just be that the executives, they wanted to be in it.
Yeah, it can be as simple as that.
It can be as simple as that.
Despite Renault Australia's best efforts, the R12 Gordinis were outgunned by the Holden dealer team and its LJ Tirana GTR XU1, which Colin Bond and navigator George Shepherd drove to victory in 5 of the 6 ARC rounds to easily win their second consecutive title. The Renaults were outclassed in several areas. Their 4-cylinder engines were less than half the capacity of the 6-cylinder Tiranas. The alloy-cased 5-speed gearboxes proved troublesome, and their front-wheel drive could not match the superior bite of the rear-wheel drive XU1s, particularly in hilly terrain. Although the 1972 ARC campaign was not a success, the R12 Gordini followed in the muddy wheel tracks of the R8 in tackling the hybrid sport of rallycross, which was a mix of bitumen racetrack and man-made rally sections. Renault Works driver Bob Watson showed formidable speed in a lightweight supercharged rallycross special. But again, the little French car was outgunned by the Holden dealer team and its mighty GTR Tirana. Remember, you can build your own virtual garage on the Shannons Club website.
Hi, I'm Jo, and this is my Renault 12GL station wagon, 1976 model. I bought the car in 1976 from Renault Australia, which was then in Punt Road, Richmond. Station wagons were hard to get at that time, and it was the only one available. I've had the car now for 40 years. The GL model was the top line of this version because it had a few extras which the TL model doesn't have, such as the roof rack and the finish. It's a manual 4-speed car. It's well set up for an old car. It's got a good heating system. It has adjustable headlights. Some people would be confused by looking at the layout in the car is, for instance, the bonnet release button is on the left-hand side. And you have to remember that the car is fundamentally designed for left-hand drive, French being French, and so that some of the modifications made when the cars were readjusted for Australian use have remained. The car's done just under 500,000 kilometres in its lifetime. And in that time, it's always got me there and it's got me back. And it's got me through some sticky conditions at times. So it's actually been an exciting car to drive when I start to think about it. It's very hard to say what's my favourite feature of this car, apart from the fact it looks fantastic, it's stylish, it stands out. I've always liked the French cars because they've got class. But apart from that, it's a pleasure to drive. The seating's very comfortable, the vision right round is very good. My favourite memory with this car would be working on the car with my dad. He was a motor mechanic and he taught me a lot about his trade. He taught me how to look after my car properly and to know what I was doing. And we used to have great times. The car jacked up down the backyard, giving it a service, keeping out of the way of Mum, and having a good old yarn about cars in general. So I reckon that's probably one of my best memories.
Tiny Hansen joins us from Shannons Auctions for the latest on the Renault 12. Welcome, Tiny.
Thanks, John.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark.
Tiny, the Renault 12, I mean, how many do you see coming across the auction blocks?
Well, we haven't had one over the blocks as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Mark,
Never?
No, I don't think so. No, I went through the archives the other day and I can't remember a Renault 12 coming across. That's not to say we'd put one through. They're fairly quirky, the Renault 12s. Get one in good condition, and I reckon they'd probably go okay.
It'd be the epitome of the keep it original. If you have
Yeah,
a lovely original Renault 12, it'd be worth something and an interest.
You'd have to find one first.
Yes.
I can't remember the last time I saw one on the road.
Yeah.
Not to say that they're not out there. I'm sure there are. We'd love to have one through.
Well, a lot of them, I mean, they were so popular as a family runabout when they came out. And I just reckon most of them just would have been driven into the ground, wouldn't they?
I remember many years ago, my sister took me to Sydney in a little Renault 12 station wagon, and we had a ball.
Yeah, brilliant little car.
It's amazing how you remember stuff like that.
It is, yeah. Some things I'd rather forget, but that's one for some reason I remember that. So.
It's amazing because it was the car of the year, but it hasn't sort of created a fanatical following in the decades that have followed.
Car of the year in 1970. Amazing, up against the XY Falcon. So pretty good accolade for a little
I
car.
think the problem for the Renault 12 was overshadowed by the 16, particularly the 16 TS in its time.
Yeah, and of course the R8, the rear engine,
The
rear-wheel
rear engine,
drive
yes.
car before it. You know, all quirky French designs, but the 12 just seems to be sort of stuck in the middle of those.
12 came in, front engine, front wheel drive. Big change from the one before.
I think Renault might have been the only marque in the world that went wholesale from rear engine, rear drive to front engine, front drive.
Yeah.
And that alone should make the Renault 12 a car of some interest because it replaced the Renault R8. Rear engine, rear drive, what a change.
Big change.
Well, given that it's the desirability for the car, this would make a very cost-effective, practical classic because it can carry 4 adults in comfort. It's proven.
Oh, of course, yeah. Inside the car, there's quite a lot of room for a small car. I'd just like to see some more on the road.
Big boot, fantastic fuel
Big boot,
economy.
yep.
What about spare parts? And I mean, I know there's some specialist Renault dealers around the place, but what's the spare parts situation?
I would imagine if you need specialist spare parts, you'd be looking overseas, I think, for some of those.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Tiny.
No worries, John.
And remember, you can get all the latest auction results on the Shannons Club website. If you'd like your own image of Renaults in competition, head to autopix.com.au.
It's interesting, John, looking back at the Renault 12, you know, a lot of car ranges have these models where they just sort of float in between two significant ones and no one sort of really pays them attention. It feels that way with the Renault 12. You've got the R8, the R10, the 16, of course, and there's the 12.
It's the Renault that slipped between the cracks, I think. And the paradox of it is really that in that context of Renaults, it felt like a conservative car, even though it was a groundbreaking car in many ways, years ahead of its time, several years ahead of the Volkswagen Golf.
Why do you think that was? Why did it feel conservative, given it was cutting edge in a lot of ways?
It looked conservative. It was a 3-box design. The Renault 16 was the world's first mass production hatchback. It was a very quirky car. Everything about the 16 was quirky, and very little about the 12 was really quirky, although it was very well thought out and brilliantly engineered, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this look back at the Renault 12, and we'll catch you next time on Shannons Club TV.